Hello, everyone, and glad to see you tonight. We got a treat tonight, without a doubt. We have another, for us, new tire, but for the tying world, not a new tire, but a very interesting individual that I think you'll all really enjoy. We have Scott Biron tonight. He cut his teeth learning to tie flies and fly fish back in the 1960s in the North Country of New Hampshire. He is an active fly tying instructor and is popular tying and instructing in national, international, and regional shows. He is a master artist in the New Hampshire Traditional Arts Program and has had several apprentices working under him. Scott is a member of the Catskill Fly Tyers Guild, an ambassador for the American Museum of Fly Fishing. He's received the Volunteer of the Year award from the AMFF. He is a regular contributor to the AMFF Journal and the Atlantic Salmon Journal. Scott is on the Partridge of Redditch, Reddington, Cortland, Riversmith, and Ewing Featherbirds Pro teams. He is on the Ambassador Pro team for HMH Vices. Ewing has come out with a signature series line of feathers under Scott's name. So with that, Scott, I'm going to turn the floor and device over to you, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it, and been looking forward to this. So I will give you a little history and a lot of different techniques that I use to tie these streamer flies. Uh, so the fly we're going to tie tonight is the one that's in the vise here. It's called Blue Magic. It's a fly that was developed by Jim Warner. Jim Warner was a very important fly tyer in the state of New Hampshire. This August, I was doing a presentation with at the American Museum of Fly Fishing, and somebody asked us a question: who was more important, Kerry Stevens or Jim Warner? And I had to stop and think. Kerry Stevens started a basically working for her husband tying flies. He was a guide, and she came out with some very historic patterns that are still used through today. Jim Warner did something different. Jim, once he was based in New Hampshire, he actually started to attract anglers to fish in this state. They would always go right through New Hampshire and go up to Maine and fish up there. But he started to get them to fish down here because his fly patterns were working in the waters down here, and they were catching big fish as well as what they were catching up in Maine. And but he was very important because he moved from using natural materials on most of the streamer flies to adding flash and adding synthetics to flies. He was never a guy that passed up a trip to the craft store with his wife. And he would come back with tinsel from Christmas trees and different things like that. And before long, a lot of the manufacturers were jumping right on board with pulling together synthetic material that eventually went into many of his flies. This isn't one that has anything synthetic in it other than the tinsel. But it's a really cool, unique pattern. And I've done a lot of research on him and was lucky that I was able to obtain some of his pattern notes. These are notes that he wrote about the flies and about the history, dating some of the flies. Really, really interesting. There's a set of these that are at the museum now, but these you don't see these too often. He also was real instrumental in Stewart and Lehman's book on trolling flies for trout and salmon. Uh, Bob Lehman, who I know, Bob had spoken to me recently, like maybe 2 years ago, about why they included the letter that Jim wrote them in the book because it kind of took them through some of the history of streamer flies, whereas Kerry Stevens was very protective of her information and not sharing her techniques with anybody. Jim was not like that. He was very much outgoing and whatnot, and they like to use that to show people a little bit in the history of streamer tying. So he was really kind of a unique guy, and he had a ton of patterns, and he took a lot of people's patterns and he innovated them and made them different. But he was all about changing things to make them better. Um, and also make money because he ran a shop. So this is really interesting. And I'll go through some of the history with you when I kind of plug along with this. So when he first started out, like many streamer fly tyers, they tied on Alcock hooks, and they loved these 2811s that Alcock made. But after World War II, Alcock was bombed in Reddington by the Luftwaffe, and they never went back into business. The only company that really went back into business that had originally been there was Partridge, and they didn't even make after a while, they weren't even making their own streamer hooks. They were subbing those out to another company. But a couple of years ago, John Larrabee at HMH was in a discussion with Leslie Hilliard and I, and we were encouraging him to maybe look at developing and bringing back these replicas of Alcock hooks. And these are really great hooks. They're a tapered uh loop eye that comes back. It's not a ring eye. It's just the same bronzing that old dark bronzing that these streamer hooks had. They're really, really nice to tie streamers on. They're very strong, good stout, and they come in three sizes. They go up to 2/0 and 4, which I'm tying on, and also a 2. But and they Alcock was the biggest hook maker for the longest time before the war, and so people still try to get a hold of those hooks. So these are really good if you're looking to reproduce something, you're looking to tie uh, some of these streamers. They really, really work well. So what I do with my streamers is I always, even if there is some uh tinsel covering them, the the body, I always use white underneath. And I think I just get used to that. I like it. And so that's why I'm using white thread. At some point I'll switch to the color that the head's going to be. But I like using this. If anything, for any reason, doesn't get covered, it you don't have a hunk of black sticking underneath it and sticking out. And for the most part, the early streamer flies were tied with uh, some floss. And when floss gets wet, whatever the color is underneath the floss will really kind of change the color of the floss. It'll bleed right through. And so that's why a lot of people, just like classic salmon flies, a lot of those flies tyers would use a primrose or a white thread underneath. And you just the key with streamers are to have a good foundation and when you're tying them. And so I just kind of move right along and get this nice uh, base laid down. And with this particular fly, it doesn't have a tail. So it what you would see with most fly tyers is you would see that where they end or start their body at the back, whichever way you want to describe it, it's kind of their signature. It's also the fly tire signature might be how long the wing is. On some fly, they specifically will give you to the back of the bend of the hook. But if they don't say that, oftentimes you'll see certain fly tires always have it's a quarter of an inch longer, or it's just half inch longer, or it's a gap width longer. So once I get that down,
Hey, Scott, there's
yep,
a question on the floor. Are you using
sure.
silk or what type of thread are you
This
using?
is Danville's 70 denier Flymaster. It's a thread that's made here in New Hampshire, so I use it. It's great. You can spin it and flatten it out. You can do a lot with this, and this is pretty much the only thread that I use on all my flies, no matter what. So, and this is the white one, and we'll switch eventually to the black one. Okay, so once I get that down, this has got a rib on it that's copper, and let's see, I'm using the UTC copper, and it's the large. You can also use the uni mylar that's copper on one side and it's blue on the other. The only challenge with this is it likes to delaminate when you put a little too much tension on it when you're wrapping it. So this is copper on both sides, so it doesn't really delaminate. Now, Peggy Brenner is somewhere out there. I can't see her, but I know she is, and she taught me this. And this is something that I always do now, and I share this with all my students, and it's a wonderful way of putting your materials on. What I do is I take the waste end of my copper and I bring it and cradle my thread. And then I just take my hand and I bring that material to the far side. And I've got that copper pinned and I haven't even put one wrap on. There's my one wrap and it's in place. The next part is the main body, which is silver tinsel. So I'm going to use, this is Danville's. It's a big spool, and it comes one side silver and one side gold. Again, I'm going to look at the gold side because I want the silver side to show. I press the two gold sides together, rotate my hand to the opposite side, and then pull my thread directly towards me. And now I've got both pieces pinned in and I can work myself forward. Now, on almost all of Jim Warner's flies, he would put a double wrap of tinsel. Now, Jim was a production fly tyer. So if you ever see some of his flies, they're rough. They're not really the most pretty flies in the world, but they're very durable. And they fish very well. He was definitely somebody that if you wanted to um, have a fly that held up for multiple fish and multiple days fishing, you were wanting one of his patterns because they would stay together very well. So what he would often do is he would put a foundation of thread down, and then he would come back to the head. He would tie in his tinsel and he would wrap all the way down and then all the way back and then tie the tinsel off again. And there was no overlap. He would always edge wrap all the way down and edge wrap all the way back, knowing that he would cover any holiday when he came back. He would lacquer after he did that. He had a big like clothesline in front of him, and he would just do body after body after body and lacquer it and hang the hooks on the on the clothesline. And once they dried, then he would finish the rest of the fly with it. But he was all about, he didn't use head cement. He used super glue, and there was super glue. I have a video of him tying a fly, and there was super glue all over the place. I don't know how he could tie with it, but he must have gotten used to it. So what I do is I use Minwax brushing lacquer, and I cut it, and this is on the thin side, so it's probably 40% lacquer and 60% thinner. And I just put a little bit on, and I wrap the silver tinsel, and I overlap. And this is a true rotary vise, which I could set up and use it as a rotary vise. But instead, I just use the hand over hand method because I can go almost as fast. And by the time you set up everything, and I've learned to keep the tension pretty much the same as you move forward with a streamer fly, and you start to shorten the tinsel that you're wrapping with. One of the things that you find is that you start to put more tension on the tinsel. And what I'm actually doing is slightly letting up on that tension as it's going through my fingers, and I'm heading towards the head of the fly. And right now I'm up at where that tapered ring eye comes back. And then I just tie it off and trim it. And then because I'm teaching and I'm apt to bump this, I'm just going to do a 2-turn whip finish to hold that in, because I've done this before and bumped it and had the whole thing come out, and I look like a real schmuck when I do that. Now I'm going to put the copper on, and this is a 10x long hook. So you're looking for maybe about 10 or 11 ribs. 3. And if you aim to get that 5th wrap about the middle of your body, you're going to end up with about 10 or 11. I think I'm doing that. I'm not really counting though. And then I'm there. And this fly, that the Blue Magic, was one that Jim felt was kind of an attractor fly. And it was really good in the fall for brook trout, but people started fishing it in the spring, and they started catching a lot of landlocked salmon with it, and it became really really important pattern in the lakes region in New Hampshire. Okay, so that's the body. Now Jim would have lacquered that at this point and waited for the lacquer to dry. I'm not going to do that because if for time constraints, I don't want to sit here and wait for it to dry. Or if I didn't, my bucktail would stick to it. All right, so let me get the next piece here. Then the next piece is the belly, and the throat or belly, whichever way you want to look at it with this. You have to look back at the history of how these tyers back in the day were writing. A lot of times they call throats bellies, and bellies throats. They use them as they interchanged. Jim always wrote hot orange bucktail or marabou extending beyond the hook. So that would tell you, even though it was listed as a throat, it was really pulling that in as a belly. And so here's hot orange, and I have a box of orange bucktails, and I've probably got 6 hot oranges, and they're all a different color. So it's really, you know, up to you what color you would want to consider hot orange. But when you start tying streamers, what you're looking for is right in here, right where my fingers are. That's where you're looking for to take your bucktail from. That's going to give you the bucktail that's not real thick and won't flare like down at the bottom. And the tips up here, they're really good, but they sometimes break. They're sometimes a little brittle. So I just try to get a small amount. People always ask, well, how many do you have? Okay, so basically what I do is I take them and I'm going to get the shorts out. Just going to pull the shorts out. And then I've got this nice stacker. And you can hand stack them. You can stack them with a hair stacker. And I get the tips pretty much aligned. And now I'm just going to take out a bunch more of the short stuff. When you get bucktail wet in the water, it looks a lot bigger and it looks like a lot fuller than what when you look at it when it's not wet. And so I always say less is more when it comes to bucktail, and that's really important. If you put too much in, what's going to happen is, and Kerry Stevens did this in her flies, she had too much bucktail and it flipped it over and it rode upside down. And her husband came back and said, "You got it. You can't do this anymore. It doesn't look like a smelt in the water." And if you look at her early flies, she only had one feather on each side of some of her wings. And then once she realized that it was inverting, she added more feathers, took a little bit of the bucktail off the belly, and next thing you knew, it rode correctly in the water. So what I do is I take it and then I just kind of spin it in my fingers and I twist it, and it kind of lines up the bucktail, so it's in a pretty good straight line. And some people will tie it in without trimming it, but I always trim mine. And if you look, I don't know if you can see this real good, but if you look right here, I've got a small area right there, what I call my foundation. It's really important. It's really smooth there, and all it is the tying thread. And I'm just going to grab the bucktail, and this is really to position it. And once you get it in there, if you want to lay it down a little bit, you can just take your thumb and work it back and forth. And once I've got like 3 or 4 wraps on, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that thin lacquer, just give it a little touch, wet that area, and then I'm going to wrap towards the eye of the hook, and I'm going to kind of tighten that up a little bit. Make it so it's not, so now if I went to pull it, I couldn't pull it out. A lot of his flies, a lot of Jim's Blue Magics were this. That was the end of the belly. He also put on some of them, and I'll do it on this one, he added a little bit, that's an awful one. He added a little bit of orange marabou. So I'm just going to take, he loved marabou. He had marabouitis. Everything had a little marabou on it. I'm just going to put a little tiny bit of marabou to give it a little more action. All right. So now we move on to putting material above above the hook. So he would take, and I gotta find a good one here. I had one, yep. He's gonna take some pretty thick pieces of peacock curl, line up the tips. Lay them right on top, about the same length as the belly. That is going to give him and give this fly a lateral line. And that makes it perfect. I just give it a, I love to overdo the lacquer. It doesn't build up because it's thin, but it just holds everything together. When people come back and say, oh, I caught like 35 fish on your fly, you know, it makes me feel good. So, all right, now we're going to talk about building the wing. So the wing, if you look at this, it's pretty unique. The wing on this has got red on the inside. It's got like a royal blue in the middle, and then it's got a small, I think you might be able to see it better on this. It's got a short, thin yellow one as the outer part of the wing. So there are 3 feathers. So we get red, hot red is what he called it. We get the blue, and then we get the yellow. All right, so let's start with the red. So I use these Ewing ones. I like them. The stems on them are thinner than a lot of the other feather wings, and they tie in really nice. Now, when you're choosing feathers, you're going to take one from one side at about the same level as one from the other. So they kind of oppose each other, and they'll, instead of having one that curves in towards me from this side, from the side you're on, curves in towards me, if I took 2 of those, both of those would curve towards me. I take one from one side, it curves towards me, one from the other side, it curves back. And if everything works right, they line up straight. And this is the biggest challenge, I think, when I teach students, is how to choose feathers off the bird and get them so that they can pick them and get them to be pretty much from the same area. That's something that a lot of people struggle with. But it's just a matter of taking your time and looking at each one of the capes. Sometimes the easiest thing to do is just bend the cape right like that. And now you're not looking at so many feathers. You can find one that's relatively looks good on one side, pop it out, and then you just move to that other side right where you were picking, and you get one from that side and pop it out. And you have to be careful because these birds, they beat the daylights out of each other, and sometimes you get broken tips, and you got little areas inside the down the feather where they've kind of like got a break in it, and there's no barbs there. So, and when like I know I tie a lot of these blue magics, and so sometimes I'll ask them for smaller capes, just smaller ones, because I know what I want is a thinner feather, and I can really get some thin feathers off a smaller cape. I had a guy from Washington D.C. call me last winter and asked me if I could tie 4 of these flies for him, and I said sure. And uh, he said I'm going to Grand Lake Stream for 3 days in, I don't know, June or something like that. And he sent me a text message with he was like elated. He caught so many fish he couldn't believe it. And his guide called me that night and asked me if I could time a couple dozen of these. And I said, not until next winter. All right, so what I'm going to do is I want to size this. And what I do is I take one just like this, one of the red ones. I lay it in so it's about the same length as the belly and as the peacock curl. And I'm going to show you this in detail in a second. But I reach in with my bodkin and I just flick the top feathers a little bit. Then I can pull the barbs away and then reach underneath and flick that little spot. And you can see where I made that little tiny, see that little tiny, and then I can just pull the bottom off and trim it. I trim my stem. It's about a ½ inch long. This is the template for if it's a 4 feather wing, this is the template for the next 3. If it's a 6 feather wing and they're all the same length, this would be the template for every one. A lot of times when I teach people, they'll take a class, they'll get 4, 5 streamers in one day. They've tied them, they walk out, and I see them 6, 8 months later. How you doing? Oh, I'm doing great. I said, no problems. Everything's good. I only have one problem. I said, what's that? I can't get my feathers to all be the same length. And when I ask them to describe what they're doing, they take the first one, they line it up on the second one. So now I want to make the blue one the same length as the red one. And I do the same thing. I reach in, make a little mark. Do it to the top. And trim it off. My blue one is the same exact length as the red one. What I do now is I put the blue one down and I pick up the red one and I size the next feather. What they were doing was they were picking the blue one up and sizing the next feather. And if this was off a hair, the next one was off a little bit. And that's often the challenge that people have. They forget to keep the template. So now I know the yellow ones aren't going to be the same length as the blue and the red ones. So I'm going to just use my red template to do the far side wing and get that the same size.
Okay. Rob would like to know what marabou feathers do you prefer? Bloods, etc. for streamers.
I can't really answer that question because they're all garbage. It's really tough. I'll tell you this. I don't know if any of you know who Ellis Hatch was, but Ellis Hatch was one of the greatest fly tyers the state of New Hampshire ever had, along with Jim Warner. I was with Ellis one day. He had a pound of white marabou delivered to his house. The box was gigantic. And he reached in and he said to me, in this box, I bet there are 2 perfect marabou feathers to tie. And what he was tying with them was Jim Warner's Winnipesaukee smelt. And he went through, he had these huge hands. He went through and he dug around, he was pulling around, and he pulled one out and he said, "There's a perfect one." And he gave it to me. I still have it somewhere up here. What I look for is a thin stem, not a thick one.
Yeah.
And I think they sometimes they say they're bloods and sometimes they just say they're, the strung ones are it 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 never it you never are consistent. You'll get these ones that you expect to be all very, very thin, and they're all got thick stems. Like what I used with um this fly. I don't know where I put it. But what I used with this fly, I didn't use the stem. I actually pulled the marabou off. So, so that's the way I kind of look at it. I find it really, really difficult nowadays to get consistent material. So that's my politically correct answer to your question. Sorry about that.
It's
And
honest. That's all we care about.
yeah, it's just the way it is. The one thing sometimes I will say to Ewing, what happened? What happened? How come these feathers aren't the way they were last year? And they'll say, well, it's not as easy as you think. There's a lot to do with what the bird eats, when it's harvest. There's a lot of more factors in it. And okay, so now the yellow wing is shorter, a little bit shorter than the red and the blue. So all I'm going to do is just eyeball where I want that yellow to be, and then I will do that same piece here. And this, again, the key to this is the yellow is shorter and narrower. And I'm talking, but if you ever watch me just sit and watch me tie without talking, this takes no time at all. The whole process of getting the wings the right size takes absolutely no time at all. The one of the biggest reasons is this right here.
Scott,
Yep.
is that a deceiver patch from Ewing that you're using? It looks like
No,
one.
this is actually a Scott Biron signature series. It looks like the deceiver patches, but it's different because the colors are different. And a lot of the feathers are a little longer. This yellow one might be more or less like a deceiver. This is an older one, I think maybe right when they started. Um, you can see the difference in the size and shape. Can see the difference in the size and the shape. This is a little bit smaller one. The deceiver ones are a little bit narrower, but they're I don't make any money from these. What I do is I help advise them on the colors, and we try to get the colors that are what the original shades were back for some of these traditional streamers, like this blue. This is not uh this is like a kind of a royally um robin color blue, not a powder blue. Um so now, yeah, this is what I wanted to show you. This tool right here, I love this. I have a couple of them. We call them pin vices. What this is a needle from what you would use to darn a pair of socks. And this is a little vise that twists and opens and closes. And about once a year, I got to replace the needle. But it's so small, it allows me to really get in there and just flick away those feathers real quickly, those barbs, and I'm able to assemble these wings really quickly and cut them and get them sized up. And it works way better than trying to use a thicker one. that's just my tip for you. And it also is really important now that I'm gonna glue my wings together and I'll show you. And I use this stuff, this fabric fusion stuff, and I've used a whole bunch of different things. Originally, when wings were glued, they would take lacquer and they would get this lacquer so it would be very thick, really, really thick, because they didn't want the lacquer to wick into the feather and make it hard and then make it not look good, and not really have a lot of action. And then I started using the fabric fusion. Some people use Dave's Flex Cement, and then they let that get pretty um, um, you know, dried out, and they use that. For a while we were using something called Tear Master and or Tear Mender. It really worked really well, but the shelf life wasn't good. This Arlene's Fabric Fusion is great. This is a 0.66 fluid ounce bottle. Don't buy it in anything bigger than this. It'll last a lot longer when you use it in the small ones. And the reason I showed you that pin vise is because what I do is I actually take and put a little bit of that fabric fusion on that pin vise. Then what I do is I take the red feather, that's the inside one, and I just lay a little of that fabric fusion on the stem. And as I'm coming down the stem, I roll this and I just put a small even bead on it. Then I'm going to lay the blue feather on top of it, line it up, and press it. And it's on and it's glued. I lay that down, put another little bead on the blue stem, put the yellow feather right on top. I got 3 stems together and they're glued.
Scott, there's a question on the board. How much
Go ahead.
shorter or narrower is the yellow feather?
A small amount. Okay, if you knew Jim Warner, there was no hard. They probably 10 flies didn't all look the same. It's just a little bit. So I'll tell you the history behind those 3 colors. There was a guide on the lake in Winnipesaukee, and when Jim was tying flies, there was a guide by the name of Glenn Morrill, and Glenn had a fly that he called the Guide Special, and it was a bucktail fly that was red, blue, and yellow. And when that fly got wet in the water, it looked lavender. It looked like a smelt. And so Jim made a lot of flies that incorporated those 3 colors into his pattern. Um, the one thing with the yellow is I think he just wanted to have a little bit of that yellow. So I would say it's probably 1/3 thinner than the blue and the red. It's about a gap and a half shorter than the blue and the red, if that helps at all. Okay, do the other side. And while I was talking, that fabric fusion was setting right up and drying. Again, there's the blue on top of the red. And then the yellow goes on top. Now, I do want to show you one other thing here. I think I have it. Oh, here it is. I put it out. So when you can't see this, but on my bench, I have a piece of felt right there. And this is a picture frame material. And I go to the craft store and I buy this adhesive felt in these big sheets, and I just cut them and I put them on top of that picture frame because they hold the feather in place. Peggy, who I don't know if she's still on the call, but she was before. Peggy showed me this. We were tying classic Atlantic salmon flies one time, and her dog would bump our elbow while we were working. And if you were marrying wings and the dog bumped your elbow and it was on a table, you lost everything. And this felt holds it in place, so it's kind of a nice little touch. If you're tying streamers or anything, that little piece of felt is a nice little thing that you can use. Okay, now I'm going to put the wing on, and here's some things that really help people when they're trying to tie a streamer like this. What I do is I look at the landing strip for where I'm going to mount my wings. Carrie Stevens mounted her wings at about 10 and 2 on her fly. Jim Warner mounted his wings, even her patterns, right on top of the hook. And a lot of people will struggle with this because their wing will move when they mount it. It doesn't set right. If you have a good base to lay your stems on, you got a better chance of having your wing set correctly. The other key is wax. And I learned this from the European salmon fly tyers. They wax everything. If they're putting tinsel on a body and there's a pucker in the tinsel, they'll back the tinsel off and wax the back of their tinsel and put it back down, and it'll take the pucker right out. It won't slip and slide. This wax is unbelievable. And if you ever watch the people who tied in hand, this was what kept everything together because they kept putting their fly down. They would blow on the wax to soften it, and then they would just put a little bit, run it a couple times up and down their thread. Then I take my wings, I line up the tips, I hold my wings between my thumb and my middle finger. Charlie Shute, the great salmon fly tyer from Cambridge, Massachusetts, taught me this one day. I was having trouble mounting Atlantic salmon wings, and he said, "Show me how you put them on." And I held them with my fingers like this, and he goes, "No, no, no, you got to use the middle finger and the thumb." And I said, "Why?" He said, "Take your pinky and touch your pinky to your thumb and your middle finger and your pinky and your middle finger." And he said, "Which one has more real estate?" The middle finger allows you to hold the wings with more real estate, and it helps allow them to mount correctly. The other thing, and I'll answer the question about the wax in a second. The other thing that you want to make sure is all those stems that you glued together, you don't want them to cross over each other. Oh, I always think of the Ghostbusters movie where they said, "What happens if we cross the beams?" And they say, "Don't cross the beams." We don't know. Um, don't let the stems cross. And I just take a nice, easy wrap, and then I take a look, and then you see this beautiful wing with two turns of thread is holding that wing in place. Because when I use this wax, this is medium fly tyers wax. They don't make this particular one anymore. You can get um this medium stuff. I'm trying to think of the company. Comes in a round cake now. It's a European company that makes it. I'll write it tomorrow in the recipe so you have it. But this one Hairline sold for a long time, and they don't sell it anymore. But it was great. It came in a little square. You actually melt the wax on the thread when you rub it, and then when you wrap it the thread onto the stems, you're actually melting the wax again and holding it in place. So now I've got that in with 2 wraps. Well, I want to have a couple more wraps to make sure, because I'm doing this on the for you guys. I don't want this to fall apart. And at this point, I'm now going to take my black thread and I'm going to introduce my black thread and just tie off the white thread and trim it off. I found that if you have your stems too long, they want to naturally bend over each other. If you keep them between a half an inch, maybe, yeah, Vineyards, that's it. Vineyards is the wax and if you're having trouble getting it, I know that I don't know if I'm supposed to say anything like this. Tell me if I'm not, but I know Stone River Outfitters in Amherst, New Hampshire. They carry that Vineyards wax. That's one of the places that you can get it. But it's not dubbing wax. It's not this stuff. That's not what we're using. We're using Fly Tyers wax. Okay. And don't make it yourself, because if you're married, you'll get divorced. It's horrible smelling stuff when you make it. Okay, now the next part, and this is really, really important with this fly. So I tied this a bunch of times. I thought I knew what I was doing. I read the recipe, everything like that. And then I ran into somebody who tied with Jim Warner a lot. And he said, "Oh, no, 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 that the wing, that the shoulder that you're using, the blue is not the right color." And I said, "Really? What color was the blue?" He said, it was really much, much different. It was a lighter blue. He said, in fact, they did not make that so you could buy it. He said that Jim had a friend of his dye the mallard so it would be the right blue. And so I kind of fretted over that. And if you were on the call at the very beginning, I told a story how I wrote an article for the um, American Museum of Fly Fishing Journal on Jim Warner. And after I wrote the article, a fellow contacted me. He was on his deathbed and he contacted me and he said, "Scott, I have 80 of Jim Warner's flies that are all carded. They're in mint condition, and many of them have uh, the history and the recipe with it." And he said, "I want to donate them to the museum. Can you help me?" And so I said, "Sure, we can get that done." And what he did was he had, I think there were 2 or 3 of these. And when I looked at them, I realized that the fellow who originally told me number of years ago that the mallard that I was using was the wrong color was absolutely correct. The the mallard is a really light, this doesn't look like it's blue, but it is. It's a real light color, and I dye it myself. I I do it with Rit dye, and it's kind of a feel. I know the color I want, and I just let the feathers sit in there just a little bit longer and they get a little bit darker than I really want them. When I pull them out and set them in the cold water, it rinses just enough out that I get the right color blue. Um, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to size up these 2 pieces of mallard. And as many streamer fly tyers, when they're first learning, they over shoulder their fly. It's a little too big. And I just put on the your side, or what I would refer to as the far side. And then the near side. They're both in place. Okay, now if Carrie Stevens was tying this, she would have glued her shoulder to her wings, and she would have actually taken her jungle cock and glued that as well, because she didn't have a vise. She was holding her fly in her hand. But Jim, he would have super glued his wings together. And I'm just gonna take two pieces of jungle cockeye here. And now, because this stuff is not the most durable, I have a little trick that I do. What I do is I take my fabric fusion and I just put a real small dab on the back of the jungle cock. And I lay it where I want it on the eye. And it just makes it last a little longer, because the brook trout and the salmon will chew these up pretty good. But oftentimes when they get beat to smithereens, they actually catch more fish. Jim Warner, I have a video of him, and he was tying one of his flies. And he was talking about putting the jungle cock on and making the fly look perfect. And he said when he had his shop, there was a guy that his shop was right on the lake, right on Winnipesaukee. And he said this guy came in, and they used to have these big boards, plywood boards that would hang, and they would hang all the streamers right on the boards. And he said this guy came in and he stood there for about 10 minutes, and he picked the perfect gray ghost off that board. He said he walked up and he paid the money for the fly, and he took the fly out of the plastic wrapper, and he put it down on the ground, and he ground his foot into the fly, ground it like that, and he picked it up, and he said, "Now that's a gray ghost." Jim said he went out, tied it on his line. He said he wasn't 25, 30 yards offshore, and he already had a salmon, because salmon are opportunistic, and they like to take the injured, not work as hard for the good ones, so they'll take advantage of the injured ones. And they used to have flies that they would tie that they would call the injured smelt and different things along those lines. So the fly, essentially, the material is done. I've waited a couple seconds here. You could maybe put a dab of lacquer on this, let the thin stuff, it sucks right in. Now what I'm going to do, and this is really important, is I'm going to kind of reverse snip off the material. So I just took the two stems of jungle cock and snipped it off. Then I'm going to take my mallard, and what you can do is just bend it to like 90 degrees and snip it. If you go in and hammer cut the whole thing at once, it'll move the wing on you 90% of the time. So this is a good way of kind of ensuring that the work that you did was good. All right, so once I have that trimmed to where I want it, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to start at the head, at right behind the eye, and I'm going to start my thread and work back to get the shape that I want. Once I get it covered, I'm going to go back to the front. And this is what I like with this thread. I can spin it counterclockwise and open this Danville up so it's nice and flat. And then what I can do is I can work my way back and get a nice smooth head with nice coverage. And then what I'm going to do is from the back, I'm going to go and whip finish forward. And pull it, and I'll do a couple of these. Make it bulletproof. And then just snip it off. Now, I'll use the lacquer again, the thin stuff, and usually get a good coat on it. And what I do is I buy these bottles. These are called Boston bottles. And I buy them by 24, and they come with the nail polish brush. And I take the nail polish brush and I take a razor blade and I cut 2/3 of the nail polish brush off the brush. I take 2/3 of the fibers off, and that gives me a real small brush to work with, and it's a lot easier to get to do a lot of fine work with. You just got to be careful when you're doing it. So this will take a little bit, but if you watch it, if you were sitting here next to me, you would see all of a sudden that the shininess of that lacquer is gone, and you'll see the thread wraps because it sucked right in. And this was something that we had noticed. Some of the UV companies had come to us asking us if we could we would use their UV on the streamer flies because they would look perfect right off the bat. And we tried it. And what I found was when we were trolling in the spring in cold water, we could actually reach up to the head of the fly and pull the UV right off. It never went into the thread. So I went back to using the lacquer. And what I do is after I put the thin stuff on, I have another bottle. This is a square bottle, so I know the difference. This bottle is thicker. This is more like 80% lacquer and 20 thinner. And usually what I get with this is two more coats on it. And you get a nice, perfect, shiny bullet head that's really durable. In fact, there every once in a while, what'll happen is we will take and use a streamer fly fishing in the spring and just have a really good day. And when you have a really good day, when you get back, about the only thing that's left is the body and the head because the salmon and have ripped the smithereens, the rest of the materials. And it's really amazing to look at that lacquer that you lacquered your body with and lacquered your mylar into is still holding solid, and the head is still holding solid, probably holding some stems and maybe one or two pieces of feather, but it never broke down. It just is like concrete, and it's really, really good. So I saw, what was the question about trolling?
Let's see. Well, we had one here about where do you find your jungle cock to buy?
Canada. I
Canada.
have friends. I'm a French Canadian. I have friends up there, and that's where most of the time that I get jungle cock. A lot of the shops up here sell it. It's not inexpensive no matter where you get it, but there are some if you email me, and feel free to, I can give you some shops that have it, and you can buy it in different grades. Like I put some really nice ones on this, but usually if I'm tying for people who are fishing, we'll use a little lesser grade. Maybe you're getting a cape for $75 instead of 150.
I just recently fell heir to a couple of capes. My brother-in-law went to a rummage sale in Stevensville, Montana, and the founder, one of the founders of Umpqua, had passed away, and his widow was selling out all of his stuff. And in a bag of necks, he found 4 brand new jungle cock capes, $10 a piece.
Oh yeah. Thank Aaron, my favor. Gotta love it. Yeah, it
Yeah.
happens. I mean, every once in a while you come across something like I was I was somewhere a couple of years ago and there was a guy and he had silver pheasant crest necks and you just can't find them and you can't find any that are long enough for some of the patterns that require it. And I said, geez, what do you want for those? Thinking he was going to say 25, $30. And he said, no, $5. I went, thank you. So,
I'll take all you got.
yeah.
Yeah. The other,
So, any other questions
yeah,
I mean,
there's one here that says, this is a dumb question. I've trolled for salmon with a downrigger and eye plugs or J plugs. I can't tell what it is. But how do you troll for salmon or trout with a fly rod?
so
Interesting.
we don't use a downrigger with the fly rods. We, what I do is I use a 6 weight fly rod and I up my reel one size. So I'll use a number 4 reel. I put a little bit of backing on, but what I do is I use Cortland's level trolling line. It's 150 foot lines. That's why I have to up the reel. And and then I have a 20-foot leader that's on that. And I have a barrel swivel about 8 feet from the fly. And what I can do with the um, Cortland trolling line is the more I let out, the lower the fly will go. But in New England in the spring, the salmon are right up on top. And so we won't even put out 20 feet maybe um, of uh, fly line. And it'll just sit right on top. The salmon come right up and hammer them right up there. The brook trout will come up and in the spring and in the fall. Um, if you wanted to fish with a fly rod with downriggers, you'd wreck your rod. It would never last. So you'd have to
Yep.
use you'd have to use like a bait rod or spinning rod with the downrigger and put the fly on. But it's really fun to catch them on a fly rod, uh, right up on top. So,
God, are you trolling with a canoe or a kayak or a motorboat?
I when I do it with myself, I'm in a small canoe with an electric motor,
Mhm.
and I have a friend who has a boat, and we fish up in Maine a lot, and it's a motorboat with a trolling plate on it, so we can slow it down. And there's a whole formula that you can have with the speed and what type of day it is, and you have to be careful because you go one way, the wind's with you, it's making you go faster than you think one day we were fishing and we were catching fish going one way. We weren't catching fish going the other way. The reason was we were going a certain speed one way and a faster speed the other way. We had to adjust for the wind and things like that. But yeah, I have a small 12-foot canoe with a flat back that's a Canadian canoe called a squiff. It's real stable. And I can go out on big lakes and with the trolling motor and I put one rod out. If I'm brave, I'll put 2, but I usually just put one rod out. And when we troll and we have the canoe go or the boat go back and forth, making big S's because that makes the fly go up and down in the water column as the speed increases. It'll come up as you make the turn away. the fly will drop back down. Salmon like crazy stuff like that. A lot of times if we're in a motorboat, we'll have 3 rods out, 2 on the side, and 1 right in the prop wash. And that the one in the prop wash often is the one that gets hit the most because they see all that foam and oxygen there and they come right up and that's where they see the fly and smack away.
Bring it.
Let's see. I'm here in Florida. How do you think that particular fly would work for tarpon?
Oh, I
That's an
don't
interesting
know.
question.
There's a fly called the Bond Bright. There was a guy from I believe he's from New York, and he developed a tarpon fly called the Bond Bright, and it's basically red and white. It almost looks like a daredevil. But it's it's got big color. This is an attractor fly, so it might work great for tarpon. You'd have to tie it on a saltwater hook, obviously, and but it might work. Give it a try. It might be the new fad.
Yeah, interesting, without a doubt. Glenn, $10 really was what we paid for those piece. Glenn wrote $10 because that's what he told his wife. He paid for them.
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
Anyway, any other questions for Scott? It doesn't sound like it. Scott, that was awesome.
Thank you. Thanks for having
Yeah.
me. I enjoyed it.
Oh yeah, I'd love to have you back again in our next season if possible.
Yeah, sure. Give me a shout like you did, and I'm happy to help anytime. Just
Mm.
pick up the phone or send me an email if you have any questions. You want to know anything? By all means, you can just email me or reach out. I'm real open to helping people.
All right, that sounds wonderful.
All right. Thanks a lot. Have a
Thank
great
you.
evening.
All right, you too. Well, just a couple of other quick things here. I got to do my recruiting drive here real quick. We'd like to have you join Fly Fishers and the Fly Tying Group. And if you go to the Fly Fishers International website, you can join both at the same time, or you can join one now and join the other one a little later. But it's well worth it. There's lots of benefits involved with being a Fly Fishers International member, and those of us that are here, we like it a lot. And if you know any young folks that are interested in fly fishing or fly tying, we'd love to have them get involved as well. And the other thing is, first video for the season went up this afternoon. www.youtube.com at flyfishers. I always screw that up. /playlists, and hit the FTG fly tying techniques button, and you'll see everything from the last 2 seasons and the beginning of this season. And this video should be up in a week and a half to 2 weeks as well. So if you want to go back and check them out, that's the place to do it. And finally, who's up next? On November 4th, we have Susan Parsons. She's going to be talking about using Unistretch for forming various types of bodies. And then she says she's developed a technique using wire with hackles so it doesn't fold down the hackle when you're ribbing and that sort of thing. So it'll be interesting to watch that for sure. And I've seen Susan present a couple of times now, and she does a good job, and she's a very smart lady. I think you'll all enjoy that very much. So with that, any other questions, comments? Anyway, I thank you all for your time and for your participation. I hope we're giving you what you're looking for, and I hope our instructors are the quality that you're looking for, because I try hard to try and find folks to come on, and I want them to be the best we can possibly have and give the best information that they possibly can. And so far, no disappointments. None at all. So with that, if no other questions, I'm going to call it a night, and thank you all very much. Good night.